Hey guys, Tyler Mahoney here. I'm with my good buddy David McCormick of the Fish 30 YouTube channel, an expert bass fisherman. He's been tournament fishing for over 25 years. He's had a lot of success, especially right here on Truman Lake. So super excited to have him back. David, how's it going?
Well, it's an interesting year. Obviously, we have the if I verbatim took you right off the Farmer's Almanac, it would be that we were going to have a very dry and hot year. And in fact, it's hard for me to believe that that's the case because we've had a very wet last, say, 4 weeks.
Yep.
We have Truman up epically high. So it's an interesting scenario, which we saw in 2019.
Mm-hmm.
If I'm not mistaken, we saw in 18, and then we also saw in 16. It's something that we have been having probably in too regular of a basis, but I prefer the bushes to be green, and I prefer the fish to have already pulled up before the water comes up. So, but that being said, here we are at, wherever we are, 15 or 20 foot high, however high it is. It's crazy. But and we still got a few weeks before the real Truman boom starts, when that people start showing up for this Big Bass Bash. Is going to be the kickoff this year. I don't think we have our first scheduled event through like Joe Bass till April, mid-April.
Yep.
So it's kind of a late bloomer. Truman's kind of a late bloomer. So, but I'm going to tell you this, that when they do pull in and the water's up, if all those fish pull into those bushes, flooded bushes, it is a special kind of fishing that you don't get to do every year, and you never get to do it at Lake of the Ozarks.
Mm-hmm.
You just don't. So there's two sides to every coin, but there's obviously a lot of big bass, and that's what these guys are going to be hunting. Truman's been the last few years been producing an awful lot of 6+ pound fish. So I don't know how well she'll fish 20 feet high, but she's coming down.
Yeah,
They're moving a lot of water, so she is falling, and all the other surrounding lakes are falling too. I hear Palm de Terre is falling, Stockton is falling, and those two lakes feed into Truman, so that all has a real bearing on it. But it could be an interesting year. I'm wondering if the weatherman or the almanac isn't correct, and we are going to have a really dry year. We just happen to have this little burst of water early in the season. So only time to tell, but obviously we're playing at high water.
yeah. So with that in mind, I mean, the folks I've been talking to, there hadn't even really been a lot of bass fishing going on yet on Truman, to your point, being a late bloomer. But we do have the Big Bass Bash coming up here. It's third week, April 17th, 18th-ish, I want to say. So I kind of want to get your thoughts on, let's hypothetically say the lake is still high at that point. I mean, it's got to come down a lot in the next several weeks to get to normal. What would be your strategy for that?
Well, it'll all depends on how much more rain we get. That's the number one factor, is how many more storms we get. But I made a video on my channel, either 18 or 19, when the water was high, and I mean, it was way up there, and I sat in a parking lot, a little private boat parking lot, and fished the stops, the concrete stops that would normally stop you from going any farther when you parked. And the tree manicured in that parking lot were my targets, and it was an incredible day of fishing. I'm not gonna lie, and I think I had 17 or 18 pounds, but I didn't win. I mean, I think I've maybe come in fourth place or that, and I fished alone that day, and it was just one of those deals. When the water's that high, there's gonna be little sweet spots that will let those fish kind of sample the current, but yet stay out of the current. We really love the current post spawn, but I'm not so sure that it's always your friend pre spawn. So it does generally push the fish around out of the current and puts them back in the pockets. I do like that. So let's imagine we were fishing tomorrow. I would be being very careful for looking for floating objects. Anytime you're operating your lake, when the water's high, you need to use some little special safety, wear your kill switch. So, but I would absolutely get back in a pocket into something where just maybe by chance it it wasn't as thick and you know, you could see rocks or you could see the bank. That's absolutely one of the very first things that I'm going to look for. If you dropped me at, say, Long Shoal Boat Ramp, I'm going to look and see just inside of the pockets where I can visually see rocks that maybe the sun actually on the sunny side. And I might just start there. I might just actually start fishing straight up on those rocks, because a lot of times the fish that have pulled up absolutely to the edge. So that would be my very first thought, is if you dropped me into somewhere on Truman Lake, I'm going into the back. I'm going to get out of the main current. I'm going to go back into a pocket and I'm going to look for rock. I'm going to look for any kind of steeper banks or anywhere where the cover's not so intense. See, that's what a lot of people got to remember, is when you're fishing something that's flooded 20 feet high, the fish have a lot of places to hide now that they before, and you still have the same amount of fish. So you got to put it in perspective. It could make things tougher. But then again, once you figure the little nuance out that, hey, those fish are laying up there on those rocks real close to the bank because it's heating up and they're out of the current. And I noticed bait fish in the same vicinity. So, and I'm gonna naturally progress towards the back at Truman into those pockets, because sometimes the narrower, tighter, steeper walls will congregate those fish. So I'm look for places that maybe are even like campgrounds or areas that where they're groomed, or there's riprap or things that allow me to get my bait right up on the bank. That's going to be my very first stop, no matter what. When I haven't fished Truman for the first time yet. I did run my boat there and break it in, and I did put the trolling motor down and made sure it worked, but I didn't fish, and the water was in the process of coming up. So whenever the water's really rising quickly, fishing is tough. You're better off when the water stabilizes or is starting to fall. It's easier to position those fish. But so that's what I'm going to do. But when you find those fish, it could be a very repeatable type pattern that you could go to the next pocket and find the same scenario in the sun, rocks showing, or the bushes were only 3 foot deep, or whatever scenario you get the bite, you try to reduplicate it. And that is something that we love to do here in the fishing at Lake the Ozarks and Truman. Both can be quite a pattern type fishing, even pre-spawn. I just want to be back in those pockets usually. So
when do you think the fish will start moving up on Truman?
I really think at 56 degrees, you're absolutely guaranteed they're moving up. There's no ifs, ands, or buts. And I'm going to tell you, believe it or not, we are not far from that already. I saw at Lake the Ozarks this last weekend, I saw water that was 55 real degrees. And I wasn't way back up in somewhere getting some special spring runoff or anything like that. That was a real on a secondary point in a normal pocket setting. So that tells me that Truman's generally just a little bit behind it, but not much. So in theory, in my brain, it could actually be going on this week while we had really warm weather on Monday, and now it's gotten cold here. That big wind we had yesterday had to have stirred this stuff up. I mean, it really, we had gusts of 50 and constant 30-mile-an-hour winds out of the south in a day in which it got over 75 degrees up here. So I'm sure it got that warm down there. That'll move fish up shallow. It really will. So I think 56 is a magic number in my brain. When I quit fishing where the big girls have been hanging out all winter, in my brain at 56 degrees, they have started to progress somewhere and they're getting to the backs of those pockets, those nooks, and set up to spawn. So that's the magic temperature in my brain. 56. I really start to flip the bank bushes. I go to flipping plastics, you know, brush hogs, beavers, and I start to know, okay, well, if they're going to want to spawn right over there in that nook, then there might be right here on this secondary, you know, just 30 yards away from where they want to spawn. So, I mean, I start to think those scenarios. They want to be there to spawn, and I'm right here. Are they somewhere in between here and there, or are they already there? Because a lot of times at Truman or at Lake of the Ozarks, you can't actually see the fish spawning. The water's not clear enough. So, you know, I'm sure they start visiting those spots at 56, 7, 8 degrees for sure. Not that they're actually working or picking out a spot, but if they're visiting that area and they encounter something they like to eat, they're going to eat it. So, getting your bait in front of their face is all part of what our game's all about. So knowing where they're going to spawn is something else that a lot of guys struggle with. And, you know, years and years ago when we fished the series called a Stren series, and it was you know, it was the same thing as the Toyota series is today, but they took us almost to every lake we went to, starting in March at Sam Rayburn, and we'd sight fish almost the whole circuit. I mean, it was quite a learning curve. So it's seeing those fish set up on lakes where you can see them. They do set up in the exact same kind of spots on those lakes where you can't see the fish. You just have to make yourself believe they're there and fish for them slow enough to make them bite.
Yeah.
So.
Now you mentioned the rocks being pretty key, warming up pretty shallow, being just heat attractors. There's obviously no shortage of rock in Truman Lake. Is there a particular arm of the lake in the springtime, early summer that you find yourself like you feel confident going to that arm of the lake?
Well, I love the Grand Arm, and I love that lower T-bow, and you know, I'm going to tell you, I love that lower end of Truman. The upper arms are so silted in these days that I don't know how many fish actually live there. And for years we drug them down to the dam area to weigh them in these tournaments. And now what we've seen is with the water rising that we've had some spawns where they actually did get off. And, you know, a lake cycles every 8 years. And so I don't know if we're on an apex of the deal, but we're seeing better bass fishing in the last 3 years than we ever have. So I love the T-bow arm. I love the palmy arm. I mean, it's a day-to-day thing. It's really going to depend on water conditions. So in the springtime, I think it does matter that you try to find the cleanest water, but it's not always. I mean, those fish that live in the dirt, when it gets dirty there, they don't leave. They deal, you know, and maybe their strike window becomes a lot smaller and they're harder to catch or harder to get them to fire, but they're still there. I really love, you know, I try not to fish more than say 7 miles from the dam at any time.
Right.
Any direction. That lower end is more stable. It doesn't mean we don't run up to bucks on fish, because we do. And yeah, that's more than 7 miles. But For the most part, we don't. In this early spring, we stay down to that lower end where the water's cleaner. And even though you think there's lots of rock at Truman, there is. But what I'm saying is rock that's exposed to you with not much in between you and the rock. So if you see rock 30 feet back there, but it's behind 2 rows of trees, you're really going to have a hard time presenting your bait there. So a lot of times, even though the right scenario is everywhere, it's nowhere because of the amount of cover being so intense. Gives them too many hiding spots. So I like to pick places that maybe have less hiding spots for them. And that'd be like somebody's front yard, something that's manicured, or riprap that doesn't have anything growing up in it. It's just a rock riprap. And a lot of times those are the easiest fish to find because they'll just follow the water line up.
Yep.
If there's nothing between you and them, they're a lot easier to catch.
Right.
So without making it too complicated, when the water's high at Truman or any lake, Stockton is another one where we'll fish campgrounds or things that are manicured that don't have a lot of brush. Because then the cover that is there, the 1 or 2 or 3 trees that are there, they're very easy to fish. And a lot of times they'll have fish on them. Opposed to having 300 targets to try to cover.
Right.
It's a lot of fish 3 targets. So anytime the water's high at any body of water, I'm going to use those scenarios in my brain that helps me get my bait in front of fish. So I'll look for that. Gosh dang, gotta love a picnic bench area when the water's really high. And
yeah.
You find some picnic benches, it's been mowed, and whatever's there that you can see, you fish, and sometimes you get bit. So obviously be careful idling around that stuff when the water's up. You never know what you're running over.
Right.
And scratch your boat, all kinds of bad things can happen. But go back in those pockets. Those fish want to spawn in the pockets. I mean, we're already seeing fish at Lake of the Ozarks way back in the very back, the last secondary point or the last deep water before we know where they want to spawn.
Right.
They're set up there in droves. They may be kind of hard to get them to bite when the water's all muddy like it is, but you can see them on your electronics. They're there. They're just, just giving you the middle finger, telling you, move on. We're not biting.
Yeah. Before we get into talking a little bit more about the baits, I want to ask a question about the term pockets. There are folks on our website that they're just getting into tournament fishing.
Right.
What is a pocket compared to like a creek?
Well, anything, when we talk about creeks in a body of water, we talk about major creeks that bring in water, but pockets are all the little nooks and little creeks that come into the sides. So knowing that a bass does not want to spawn, not that they won't, but the majority of them won't spawn on the main lake. They will move back into a pocket, trying to be able to get sun onto their nest. Eggs germinate or hatch in about 7 days if they're given direct sunlight. So the bass keeps that in mind when they're picking a spot to spawn. They want that sun on there, but they want us, and the very first spawning will occur in the very, 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 very back of something. And I say like a nook or a pocket.
Right.
Little indention. At Lake of the Ozarks, pockets are everywhere. I mean, Lake of the Ozarks has more shoreline than Lake Michigan, yet it's not as big a body of water. You say, well, how's that possible? Well, it's because if you looked at it from a plane, got these incredible little nooks and crannies and pockets, and those fish go back there, because they don't want a lot of current on their nest, and they want to be in the sun. So they want to control the environment. And so most of the bass will push back into the very, very back of the pockets, nooks, creeks. And and spawn. And they'll
Mhm.
set up on a little log, or they'll set up right near something, and fan a little 18 to 20-inch area out and call it home. And that's where they're going to lay their eggs and defend. And if you'll get your bait into that zone, even if you can't see that area they've picked out, you get your bait in that area, and they're very aggressive.
Yeah.
So
Interesting. Well, that's good to know, because I've had people ask, pockets, everyone talks about it, but not everyone knows exactly what folks are talking about, especially the new guys that are getting into tournament. They're wanting to learn all that. So that's awesome.
all right. Well, Stockton happened to be on top, so I grabbed it. And this is a topographical map of Stockton. And you mentioned pockets. What's a pocket? What's a nook? I'm gonna just pick something here, like down here by Crabtree, and have you guys look. This is the dam.
Yep.
So let's imagine the fish pulled into this pocket right here. I would be looking in the back of this little nook, and this nook, and the very, very back of this little nook. Because they heat up very quickly compared to the rest of the lake. That's, anywhere you can get into the very back of a little nook, cranny, like these two pointy ones right here look really good. Fish are going to want to spawn in the very back of those. They're protected from the north wind. They're protected from cover. They have a more stable water temp, because that's what they're looking for that 7-day period when those eggs are hatching.
Right.
So get back into those things. Bass tend to spawn a little further back than a crappie can set up just pretty much anywhere and spawn if they have kind of rock. Where a bass is going to be maybe a little more. I say that, and I've actually come across some very large fish at Kentucky Lake out spawning where they shouldn't be. So every time, we try to set a parameter up for fishing, there's going to be some rule breakers. I always say that. So some of those big fish will just spawn on something crazy out where they're not supposed to.
Right.
I've seen it. So, but the majority of them, when you go back and you sight fish and you see hundreds of bass, they're in the back of those creeks, cruising up and down in front of the bushes, and the male actually sets up the bed, and the female cruises by and supposedly judges the bed and picks her mate that way. So, you really don't find those females until you found the males. And when the males first pull in, fishing those secondaries that are back up away from that pocket can be very, a good scenario where you might find those big females waiting to pull in there. That's one of my favorite scenarios to try to find, is once those males have pulled into that and you can go catch those buck bass, that's fine and dandy, and you'll get yourself a small limit doing that. But those bigger girls don't show up right away. They don't show up in front of the nest till around 60 degrees, 59, 60. But, I've read things that say that those big females get in groups, and I've even seen some videos where they show them bumping their bellies and rubbing their bellies on wood to kind of loosen the eggs. And anytime a tournament fisherman could find females grouping up that time of year, obviously that's a scenario we as tournament,
that one, yeah.
We're looking for that.
Yeah. Well, let's get into some of, I know you had some baits tied on. Let's talk some of your springtime and early summer baits for Truman.
Okay. And I'm going to group them both together, because I'm showing you stuff that I've actually fished at Lake of the Ozarks that's actually tied on. I haven't untied anything. I'm just going to show you rigs that I fished last weekend with some success. We're working on the video right now, but a lot of times I want to if the water isn't super high and I was at Lake of the Ozarks, I'd want to focus on those secondary points that are not quite back all the way back to where those fish want to spawn, but halfway to 3/4 the way back there where there's still deep water. And I'm gonna throw a crawdad colored crankbait. I mean, and a jig. And that's like a staple. We'll start out in the winter still throwing a stick bait, and I even have a stick bait tied on. I think I might not have brought it in because I'm throwing a square bill already. When the water's 52 or 53 degrees like it is right now, like the Ozarks, we've already left the stick bait. So I'm going to grab my wiggle wart here first off.
Sounds good.
So, and I'll start out with a little disclaimer. This is a buddy painted this for me for himself, and I stole it out of his box. And because he was whooping me with one the same color. So, it's a medium diving bait. We throw it on light line. And I noticed that these particular baits, we always throw a little snap. And that allows that bait to really have kind of a fairly active back and forth. That's one thing about a wiggle wart or a rock crawler. You got a real tight wobble, a good dig, and the whole time you're trying to set yourself up. The big deal about this bait, I think, is not to stand off the bank and throw it directly back at the bank and then pull it from the shallowest to the deepest water. I really don't think that's, hey, my bird dog is growling at another dog and that's being walked. I'm going to do something so this doesn't get crazy. I didn't even think about it. She could start barking. So I'm going to put her away. So back to the angle, because I mean, it really, this is so important that guys miss this. I see them throwing like directly perpendicular.
Yeah.
Really, I pull the boat in and I'll set the nose in 7, 8, 9, 10 foot, never any deeper than 11. And I'll cast this out in front of the trolling motor, which now I'm parallel pulling it in an equal depth zone. So I want to cast out into 7 foot because I'm seeing them on the locator in 7 foot on this secondary point. And I just knowing that they want to set up there because they're going to want to spawn in that little pocket that's just 50 yards away. Then I drive this crankbait into the rocks. I want to feel the dunk, 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 dunk the whole way back. And if I'm in too deep of water, I'm going to scoot the boat in. I mean, it's about paralleling the bank when you're throwing a lot of these springtime baits. These fish are setting up on the bottom. They are the sun heats the water up and it naturally pulls them up shallow to do their thing. They're driven to want to be in the shallow water by the length of the day. So a lot of times, even though the water temperature, we do this pattern with this bait all through the winter. I've had tremendous days at 43 degrees with this bait. Not this particular color, but this or a wiggle wart or a rock crawler, a spro rock crawler, one of my absolute favorites. For some reason, it drove it just a little too deep for it. The water's so muddy, the fish are shallow. So I didn't have any of the new spro shorter build ones is what I really thought would be the deal. But we had plenty of the wiggle warts because we've been collecting them for years. And that custom color painted one, they really like that orange, brown, green craw. I really try to stay away from the shad patterns when I'm in that 50 to 58 or 9 degree water. When I'm trying to mimic either a crawfish or a green-eared sunfish. Both of them are something the bass will consume if he comes across them. So that's absolutely a staple of this time of the year fishing, and I'll show it in the video. We didn't quite cash a check. I'll give a little spoiler alert. We had a little failure And we, in the last 30 minutes, knocked it. Looked like, I haven't actually viewed the footage, but it looked like about a 5-pounder,
Oh,
which would have put a whole different scenario because we'd already gone through 10 or 15 keepers already and had a pretty good sack of fish going.
mhm.
But we actually knocked it off with the net, which, you can't really blame anybody but me and my partner for that deal. And that's
Yeah,
just tournament fishing. It's
yeah,
gonna give you some humble pie, and we got a big old piece of that this weekend. But my wife did point out it should make pretty good video.
yeah.
She says people like to see you lose
Right.
too.
Yep.
They may like to see you win, but a lot more fish losing goes on. So I'm
So
gonna
how long
grab
does
another.
this wiggle ward stay? How long are you throwing this? So springtime, and then when's the cutoff? When do you start
Well,
switching?
I'm gonna cut off soon as I actually feel like they're bedding, and
Okay.
then I'll throw it a little bit after the spawn. But
Okay.
it connects with the fish in the 8 to 10 foot range.
Mhm.
Really, how I see it, I'm trying to connect with those fish that are thinking about pulling up. Not that you don't throw this bait up in 3 foot, because if you look at that bill, I don't know if you can see it. It's all
Yep.
torn. The bill is from the rocks have just worn off the paint. Um, and I do say this. This is something that Blake and I discussed. When the water is muddy, I think I like having a painted bill. When the water is clear, I like having a clear bill.
Hmm.
If you'll notice, a lot of the crawfish crankbaits that are out there, not a lot of them, except the super old ones, have a painted bill.
Right. Yep.
And I really like that when the water's dirty. And as a matter of fact, Spro has a bait called, I believe it's called the Rockstar. It's a chartreuse one, and it's got a chartreuse solid bill. And we have had great success after the spawn in muddy water on it. So I'm gonna fish it just till honestly till about 65 or 66 degrees, and then I'm gonna start throwing a deeper bill, because at that point the spawn is over and they've quit guarding the fry, and now they're gonna pull out to the first 10 foot.
Right.
When they do that, that this bait, suddenly I want something that'll touch the bottom in 10 to 12 foot of water, so I start fishing crankbaits with a bigger bill.
Gotcha.
So here's another really a good one to consider. I was throwing this down at Lake of the Ozarks, and a square bill. I really start to throw it around that 51, 52 degree range, and I'll tend to throw it on a little lighter line until those fish really are, say, 3 or 4 foot or shallower. Then I'll jump up to a thicker line to keep that. Keep in mind that when you're square bill fishing, that line diameter has everything to do with how deep that bait goes. I know a lot of people think that it doesn't, but it really does. This 12-pound line or 14-pound line will let the crankbait go a foot and a half or 2 foot deeper than, say, a 20-pound big game will, which I'll throw that in the heat of the summer when we're really trying to fish lay downs and things where we don't want the bait really to exceed 3 feet. But yet right now I want to get a little deeper than 3 feet. So if it was a super bad cold front day, I might even drop to 10-pound if I was feeling really frisky. Just because that allows that bait to get to 5 or 6 foot, where normally you won't fish it on that skinny line. But so that bait allows you to cover that same scenario and not drive down near as deep, and fish at a faster reel speed. That's why everybody likes a square bill, is because you can really speed it up. It's a bait you can put some speed to, and that makes the fish have to make a decision quicker. So I put this on at the end of the day, the yellow, and this one even has a big knock in it. You can hear it. Got a big knocker in it that I was trying to pull the fish up out of the dirty water. But honestly, I would really throw a craw pattern most of the time,
Mhm.
even on our bill. This time of the year, I'd pick something that had an orange belly, brown on the sides, dark on the back, maybe some kind of craw pattern. They eat a lot of crawfish before they spawn. Just and we see a lot of orange pinchers. When I start seeing pinchers in the live well after the tournament fishing day, which we do in the winter time, we see a lot. Put 5 fish in there on the A rig or the jerk bait or whatever, and only catch a couple of them on a jig, maybe. But the bottom of the live well would just be orange with pinchers that they threw up while you drove around with them in the live well. So I'm gonna touch one other thing that you really did, and this is boy, once it gets dirty, I really am an advocate of the painted blades. So this is a spinnerbait with painted blades, and I really, even though I'm throwing it in all that flooded stuff, if I can get away with it, I want that extra hook. That oops, excuse me, I want that trailer hook. You know, they nip at those crankbaits, and you get them hooked on the outside of the mouth, and you pick up your spinnerbait and you throw it in there, and you're like, ooh, boom, you feel them hit it. Oh gosh, you hit it again. And ask yourself at that point, should I be throwing this spinnerbait? Because if I just had my crankbait on, I might have landed that bite. So really, I'm going to use this as a search tool, and if they're really chewing on it and putting it in their mouth, I mean, I'm pretty sure a couple of the tournaments recently have been won on spinnerbait, where they said they only got 7, 8, 9 bites all day, like the Ozarks, but they were the right bites. So I'm going to throw a spinnerbait. I'm also throw one with round blades. And I even have a brown spinnerbait. I know that sounds crazy, and most companies don't even make it. As a matter of fact, the ones I've got, I've taken somebody else's bait and changed the head color and pulled the skirt off, and you know, and totally customized it and put a brown skirt on it, because I really feel like at 51 to 53 with a big Indiana and a big Colorado blade, the thumper blades we call them, that's how you're going to get one of the first spinnerbait bites. But once you get around 55, they've already been biting the spinnerbait for a little while. That's why we go to the willow blades, and you can really sometimes make a bass bite by something going by them at a little faster speed. That's what that willow blade really allows you to do, is pull the bait by them faster, which can ensue a reaction. So those are my moving baits that I'm going to try. And obviously if the water's clear enough and it's allowed, I'm going to make some casts with that A rig just to see. Truly, it's not something I talk a lot about, just because we don't, it doesn't seem to work at Truman. It's strange. Baits, some lakes they'll just absolutely work on, and then sometimes it doesn't. But my go-to, obviously, this time of year, when if the water's clear enough and they're up there on those rocks, like that scenario I told you, and maybe I got a bite on a wiggle wart or a square bill, and I'm going to turn right back around on those rocks, and I'm going to pick something up that I can move slow and put directly like in their face, to the point where they have to either bite it or swim away, because I've literally put it in their space.
Right.
So it's either going to bonk them in the head or they're going to eat it. And a lot of times I really believe these jig bites, when we drop them in the bushes and we put the heavy weights on and the fish are in the bushes, and I'll put a totally different style jig on than this one, and we go to a big weight like 3/4 or 1 ounce, we know they're biting out of reaction. It falls straight down into their area, and they're like, they don't, and they just eat. They just, boom. And so getting it right in their space, I mean, once you've identified they're laying up on those rocks and you caught one on your spinner bait, or you caught one on your stick bait, or you caught one on your crankbait, whatever your search tool is, don't not turn around and pick something up that you can put right in there, because there may be a whole mess of them there that aren't willing to touch that bait that passed over their head. You know, they had to move to get it. That little guy did because he wants to eat. But those big ones sometimes won't do it until it's right there.
Mm-hmm.
And generally, when lakes are high or when there's current, it can be a scenario where you need to think about, was that just a resident fish living there on that piece of cover, or were there a whole bunch of them there because the current has put them there, because the scenario is right for them to be there, and they be there in droves. So that was a big football jig, and that's something I'm going to fish when I'm out on that secondary point. I like that football jig. It thumps on the bottom real hard. It's heavy. It's 3/4 ounce. It does get hung more, and I know that. But what it also does is it makes them react better. It falls with that thump, and I'm convinced that there are days when a light jig will outfish a heavy jig, but there are just as many days where a heavy jig outfishes a light jig. So you got to let them talk to you and let them tell you what they want, because a lot of times I find myself forcing the issue. So here is my finesse jig, and this is absolutely my favorite jig. They'll bite this thinking it's a green-eared sunfish if I take this same setup, and when I'm dipping the thing orange like it is now, I'm really trying to mimic a crawfish, or I think that's what they think it is.
Mm-hmm.
But once they move in and they're now picked out an area and they're cruising the area, they are not going to like any green-eared sunfish. Green-eared sunfish and my Micropodus salmorti are eternal enemies. It's just how it is in the under the water world. Those green-eared sunfish eat so many baby bass fry, and in turn, the bass will pass up even an easier meal to eat to get after a green-eared sunfish because of his hatred from the spawn time.
Mm-hmm.
They're chasing those green-eared sunfish around, and when that male is fanning that nest and he's got 6 or 8 green-eared sunfish sitting around waiting for him to look the other way so that they can sneak in there and get some of his fry, there's a real hatred there. So I will then make this chartreuse. And I really believe that once you've taken your jig and turned it chartreuse, you now are a green-eared sunfish. And gosh, there are days when they're actually starting to set up that you got to have that chartreuse on there. Yeah. But they're not setting up yet. They're pre-spawn. They're eating crawfish. That's why I have it orange for this weekend, or from last weekend. That's a 7/16 ounce ball jig. It's not a real heavy jig, but it's something that I can precisionally put in next to things. And, you know, we've got videos on the channel. I got a table rock video where they're in the bushes, and all you had to do was flip this dude up to the bushes all day long. And I mean, my arm was swollen going home. I remember I put no less than 40 keepers in the boat that day.
Wow.
So, and and a lot of times guys get this in their head that when they're fishing a jig, it's always a crawfish. And I'm going to tell you, in my brain, it's actually the exact opposite. If it's not cold water and it's, say, 56 or above, I want to think about being a green-eared sunfish, because that hatred between those two species comes on very strong during the springtime. Mm-hmm. They'll even hang out in shallow water waiting for the green-eareds to go to nest so that they can raid those nests and pay those green-eared sunfish back for all the problems they give them while they're spawning. Mm-hmm. It's a great post-spawn pattern. When those big yellow beds we start fishing the top water baits around there and get these giant post-spawn females that are looking for big things to eat. And it's a pretty interesting deal. But that hatred deal is real. I mean, I know that sounds silly, but you know, it's real. The
Yeah.
green-eared sunfish and the largemouth or the spotted bass or even smallmouths, man, they just the hatred during the spawning time of them eating each other is real. So you got to have that on. That I won't take that off. Even when I start fishing brush piles in 10 and 15 foot of water in post spawn July,
Mm-hmm.
this is on there, as well as a, like a big worm or a straight tail worm or a stand up head or some of those summertime
Right.
baits. But we haven't really got into those, but yet a shaky head is something that could fit into that scenario that I haven't got out. It wasn't on the deck of my boat, but I'm not going to tell you I didn't talk about it with my buddies as we were driving home, wondering why did we only catch him on the wiggle wart?
Mm-hmm.
And could we have caught him on this or could we have caught him on that? And that's a lot of times picking up that kind of intel after the tournament's over. Sometimes the best time to get the information from the guys who want it, because that's about the time they're most willing to tell you the truth.
Right.
Uh, I honestly, you say this, and I can still remember a tournament, 2 or 3 of them at Table Rock. The water was 56 degrees, and guys were starting to see fish up shallow, and we all thought it was going to be one on a jig. And 2 or 3 times, a spook. And what? Yeah, a big topwater spook. They didn't get but 6 or 7 bites all day, they said, but they were the right bites.
Interesting.
So, that anybody that follows a lot of the stuff watches Jacob Wheeler fish a buzzbait at 55 degrees. I pay a lot of attention to that because I normally don't get bites on top water at 55 degrees, but flooded Truman Lake, spawn coming up. It is a bait that a guy could go fish at Truman and cover a lot of water. And, he might not get very many bites, but, if I was fishing at Truman on that weekend in the Big Bass Bash, that would also be something I would think about. Your favorite black or white buzz bait, and kind of the right mindset of just a numb mindset, because you're not going to get very many bites.
Right.
It isn't a lot of fun unhooking fish, but the 1 or 2 that come up and get that dude might be that 5+ pound class fish that you're looking for in that kind of event. The Big Bass Bash is not really meant for catching 43 pounders, even though that's a great day. And on the right scenario, a 3-day tournament, you win. But on a Big Bass Bash deal where only 1 fish counts, it's a thought. Buzzbait at 55 degrees is this magic number. I'm trying to this year, trying to put this into my own scenario of fishing, and I have not successfully done it, but that much cover of flooded timber, big lake like that, ooh, I'm going to have a black buzzbait that clacks lightly on the deck.
Nice.
You wanted to know exactly what Dave would have? Dave would have a dinner bell made by Picasso. That the buzzbait of my favorite buzzbait because of its ability to adjust the clacking, how it clacks. And muddy waters, sometimes a clacker can really be the deal. So 55 degrees, and I think by then we'll for sure be there, or heck, by April. So if we had the right scenario, we didn't have a lot of rain and we had lots of warmth, conceivably the new moon would fall about that time frame. They could actually be up in 1 foot or 2 foot of water and be crazy good.
Yeah. It's been in the upper 40s towards that area you talk about, you liking to fish down by the dam within 5 to 7 miles. It's been 47 to 49 in the upper parts of the arms, like the upper grand. It's been 50 to 53. So if things continue, although we're supposed to get some nights this week in the 30s, and I think one even in the
27,
20s.
27 tonight here.
Yeah, yeah. So
Crazy.
I don't know, but to your point, I think we should be creeping up. You would think on 60 degrees by the time Big Bass Bash rolls around.
Well, then, on moon phase, we just had a full moon yesterday, I believe, day before, or maybe it's tonight. Well, we've had a full moon, and everything that swims spawns based on moon phase. And you say, why? How is that possible? Well, it has so much force on our planet that it can raise our oceanic water levels in the right scenarios 6-7 feet just by the pull of the moon on our on our field. So everything spawns by the moon phase. It has that kind of force in our world that every fish spawns by it. So it's going to matter what that moon phase is on the 17th. So we could conceivably at Lake of the Ozarks have fish spawning in 30 days. I don't know about Truman. The one factor that we don't know anything truly about, and we love to guess and talk about, is how the current affects the bass. And I personally believe, no real basis of this other than my experience, is that they will not spawn. Is that they will at Truman sit and wait and even see fish spawn or see them on beds in 70 and 75, 77 degree water. I know that sounds crazy, but in fact, it happens at Truman because this is a flood control lake. It saves people's lives every year by holding this much water in it. And the bass want the scenario of having 7 days of steady water level so that they can get those eggs hatched. So they spawn later into June on this lake than any other lake in Missouri that I know of. So, I don't know. I know that 60 degrees will put them in the bushes and all that, but I don't know if it'll actually make them spawn.
Yeah.
The water falling, them pulling the lake to try to get it out in case we have another flood, because that's really what the lake is designed to do. Fishing and all that other stuff is secondary to controlling floods that can take people's lives. So that current is the issue that nobody truly knows much about. And will they spawn in the current? I've actually seen them at Grand Lake where they pulled the beds to their dry and see the fish like looking at their bed in an inch of water, and I can see the back of their back trying to get up there. They're still driven to do it, but if we pull those beds dry, then obviously that year's hatch is not getting off. So
what's your prediction? You think the big bass is going to come out of Truman or Lake of the Ozarks?
With exact scenarios we have right now, my bet would be Lake of the Ozarks just because it's more stable. But that being said, falling water or stable water, I don't know. I know that Lake of the Ozarks fish is very big. That's how it soaks up that many boats, so this offers an option to people to fish on a lake that they're not going to see that kind of traffic. There isn't one big boat on Lake of the Ozarks, just too many trees, too many obstacles, too many bad things can go wrong for a big boat in that kind of water. So I don't know. It's the sleeper for sure. Truman's for sure the sleeper. But had we not had the flood, I'm 50-50. And if I don't generally fish in those events. gosh, if the lake's only 7 foot high, I'm on Truman.
Mm,
20 foot high, then I'm probably on Lake of the Ozarks.
yeah.
We'll know more about it as we get closer.
Yeah.
If the lake's only 5 foot high and we haven't had a bunch of rain and we've had a lot of warm days, and I'm telling you what, that old Truman Lake has big fish in it, and if they all come crashing in at the same time, come in, get up shallow, it could be just epic where a guy might catch 30 or 40 fish in a day and be able to put some 5-pounders on the scale.
Mm-hmm.
Above that, I don't know. Last year I weighed 2 in events. Normally you catch them a day or two before the event.
Yeah.
A couple times weighed some gigantic fish in the events, day of the tournament. Caught them the day of the tournament. So I don't know. Those were both post spawn when the fish were out on structure. So it's different when they're all scattered up in there in the bushes. But remember, they're all driven to go there by a certain date. That's part of the Micropodus salmorti's life, is to go up shallow and spawn. And so undoubtedly that's the funnest and the best time of the year to catch numbers and big ones, is when they're all up shallow to have their gig. So I don't know. I'm leaning to Lake of the Ozarks right now, just based on water level and moving of water, but I'm not seeing them talk about any massive amounts of rain. So we'll see.
Yeah. Well, sounds good. We'll see. We'll see what happens here in a few weeks.
Right. I'm gonna have. I got a new boat. I've been a little back on making videos. Real life called, and I had to be, the dad and the homemaker and earn money and all that. So I've fallen a little behind on my video editing, but I'm gonna have a little walkthrough video on the new boat, because it's really a pretty boat, extremely fast boat. This boat is significantly faster than the last one. I can't tell you why, but then I'm gonna show this Lake of the Ozarks tournament where we knock the big one off in the very end of the tournament. I mean, we catch a lot of fish and we go from a little limit, cull our way up to a pretty decent bag, and then we have our opportunity at that top 10. So, my wife says I must really like it. Obviously, to go back weekend after weekend to get kicked like that, you must like it. And I do. I like the competitive factor of it. And I don't like that we weren't competitive. We were in the 14-pound range and came in 50th place. If you were in, say, the 16-8 range, you were inside the top 20.
Wow.
I mean, it just there was just so many bags that came in too. I mean, we were 50th place with 14. I mean, come on, geez, Christ, they sacked them up. Now that was 140 boats, I think, in that. So not a gigantic event, but a big event. So we got another one this weekend down there, and I'm suspecting the secondary points back into where they want to spawn. Spinnerbait, crankbait. The crankbaits cover a lot of water, and you can.
Yeah.
So that's what we're hoping. See what happens.
Yeah. So
get to making some videos is what I need to do.
Absolutely. Okay, so a couple more prediction questions related around Big Bass Bash.
Okay.
What weight of a fish do you think it will take to win the Big Bass Bash?
I'm gonna say 683.
Okay.
Which is a little less than what it has been, but you got a little different scenario this year with a lot of water in the system in both lakes. But dadgum, I mean, you look at Facebook, I know I've scrolled through it and I saw today, 2 guys holding fish that were over 8 pounds.
My goodness.
So, but this is absolutely the best time of the year to see those big fish. And they were both really, really good tournament guys who aren't kidding. They went out and, they know what they're doing. They didn't tell me exactly what they caught them on, but I got to believe in the lower end, they were probably fishing a jig or maybe an A-rig. There's still a little bit of A-rig going on.
I'm fairly certain, because I talked with the Terrells a couple weeks ago. I'm trying to remember exactly what they told me, but I'm pretty certain that they have not eclipsed the 8-pound mark in a big bass bash.
No, they haven't. And so, hey, that's just to see one that big. I mean, gosh, I've got just a handful of 8-pounders, and I even live on a lake that has those kind of. That's the beauty of the big bass bash. It's a scenario where, well, your 1 in 2,000 chance of winning there is a little bit of a lottery thought on it, because it is just one fish. And heck, one year didn't a 16-year-old win it?
Yeah.
Oh my God. You tell people that and they're just like, are you kidding me? No, I'm not kidding. That kind of stuff only happens in America, folks.
Yeah.
Come on. I mean, that's the biggest bass tournament in the world, guys. There isn't one that's bigger. There isn't one that pays out more. Just isn't. And it is really geared for the weekender, the amateur guys who don't make money from the fishing industry. And that's something that they have limits on how much money you can earn and be in this, or be a full-time guide, or how much you paid in the way of entrance fee. If you paid amount for an entrance fee to get in a tournament, you're not able to fish in that tournament. And I like that. I like that idea, because, well, the majority of us don't get out and fish as much as I, or even guys that fish a lot more than I do. So we shouldn't be allowed in it, and it should just be amateurs, because, I mean, it's the total Cinderella story, where somebody just comes out of the blue and catches that 683 or 7-pounder. It's 7-pounder a couple times, but usually that's the heavy 6 is usually where you're going to win your hourly. You're going to win $1,000 for your hourly deal, and then that's how that big bass deal works. You weigh your fish in, and they pay out hourly, and they might pay 20 or 30 places per hour. So you might have a 4 3/4-pound fish that actually gets you paid in one of the hours. Now, it's not going to land you in one of the top 3 places that pays the big bucks, but I know guys that catch 4 to 5-pounders and catch 2 or 3 of them in a weekend and come home with a pocket full of money. I mean, come home with $1,500 or $2,000 from getting in the money 3 or 4 times. So it's an interesting scenario, and it happens only in the spring and the fall. It's just not, it's a big time. It really brings in a lot of income for that area. And I know there's some people that don't like it because it brings in so many people, but maybe those people should think about the people that have motel rooms to rent and meals to serve to get, so that they can pay for their homes and cars.
Right.
But I really think Terrells do a great thing for the fishing world by putting this on, and they are the ones that really got this thing as big as it is. So my hat's off to them for what they do for our industry. And I'm going to fish one of their events this weekend, as a matter of fact, down at Lake of the Ozarks. So it's an Anglers in Action event, which is their team circuit. It's not a big bass bash event, but nevertheless, it's a good time, and the sticks will be out, I promise you.
Yeah.
Hopefully we catch them again.
Right. So last prediction question related to the big bass bash. If you had to pick one bait that you think is going to win the biggest bass, going to catch the biggest bass on the weekend of the event from both lakes, what bait do you think that big fish is going to come on?
Well, I'm going to tell you, I bet it's a matter of record. I'll bet if you went and looked at it, that in the spring event that it's a jig.
Mhm.
I'm pretty sure that's what the 16-year-old kid caught that one. He said he threw his jig up to the bridge column up the pomme de terre arm in the middle of the day and just decided to throw it out there towards, the bridge column, and caught a 7-pounder, and just like that. So, and it was on a jig. So if I'm making a prediction, it's a jig. And I'll bet if somebody looks that up, that I don't know. I don't know if you can look that stuff up or not, but that'd be very interesting.
Yeah.
Because my bet would be that it was a jig 50% of the time in the springtime
Mhm.
tournament that won that. It's such a versatile bait. Allows you to fish it fast, slow, cover the scenarios that you encounter when you're, moving around bass fishing. So
Mhm.
that's my prediction. Truman might be a spinnerbait. Boy,
Yeah.
that old spinnerbait catches. I tell you one last story. I took my wife bass fishing maybe 10 times in her life. And I took her one time to Truman Lake. One time.
Mhm.
And we got on the water before a tournament came out, and we were in a nice spot, and all these guys came in, were tournament fishing around us, and we were just like, oh, we're not tournament fishing, you can fish right around her. And she cast out of the back of the boat with a spinnerbait at Truman and pulled out a giant backflash, and when she reeled up, she got a bigger Truman bass than I've ever caught. And
Wow.
still to this day, I mean, it was almost a 9-pounder and was just a complete donkey. And, so you can't rule out a spinnerbait at Truman when the water's high, because it offers you the ability to cover a lot of the bushes and the
Mhm.
things that are showing when the water's only 7 foot high. Would be my prediction for Truman. If we don't get rain and we get the water to come out of the lake, we'd be around 7 feet by April 17th. And then you could throw your spinnerbait around those bushes and get a big fish to react,
Mhm.
and catch a lot of fish too on that scenario, where you might have a real day where you had to wear a Band-Aid the next day on your thumb. Just
Those are
always
good days.
it's a good thing.
Yeah. Well, David, I think we've just talked about a lot of great information that all of our members are going to find extremely valuable. Appreciate your time, as always, your knowledge and your willingness to share. For those that have watched this long, we're talking with David McCormick of the Fish 30 YouTube channel. Go over to YouTube, subscribe to his channel. We run all of his videos on TrumanLakeFishIntel.com as well. But we love having David as one of our contributors, and you guys can support him by going and subscribing to his channel. He's got some awesome videos up there.
I appreciate it, and we're trying to bring more to you. I really enjoy it. That's why I do it. It's not about making money or anything like that to me. It's about loving bass fishing, loving tournament fishing, and loving all the things that come with it, all the rods and reels and
Yep.
bait. So it is what it is to me. It's what life's all about.
Absolutely. Well, David, thanks again. And hey, guys, thanks for watching, and we'll catch you on the next one.
Appreciate it, guys.